This is a picture of one of the most iconic, beautiful, and touching moments in wrestling history. On the surface level, the way it looks like any other wrestling moment. Wow, a wrestler became a champion, how awesome. But if only you knew Eddie Guerrero's journey to get to this moment. A 17-year journey that was anything but easy. Struggling for opportunities, struggling with personal demons. Eddie Guerrero, against all odds, finally got to this moment. A moment that many thought he was never gonna get to. So let's take a look at that journey, and let's take a look at why that is not just another wrestling moment. In fact, it's something much bigger. If there was any wrestler who was born to be a wrestler, it was Eddie Guerrero. Born in El Paso, Texas, his dad, Gory Guerrero, was one of the biggest stars in the early days of Lucha Libre. Eddie's three brothers all were wrestlers. Wrestling was in his blood. From a young age, Eddie and his nephew Chavo would wrestle in the backyard ring just practicing moves on each other. See, other kids had swings in their backyard, these guys had wrestling rings. Eddie made his official in-ring debut in 1987, and this is where the grind started. For the next 8 years, Eddie traveled the world perfecting his craft. Eddie became a huge star not just in Mexico, but also in Japan, and Eddie had some classic matches with the likes of Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, Jushin Thunder Liger, and Tuco Scorpio. During the years, Eddie was also in a tag team with a wrestler named Art Barr, and they became an amazing tag team called the Los Gringos Locos. They are considered one of the greatest heel tag teams in the history of Mexican wrestling. Because of how good they were, Paul Heyman actually approached them to come to ECW, but before that could materialize, Art Barr passed away at the age of 28. This affected Eddie heavily. Eddie and Art were close. Even in this interview from 2001, when Eddie was asked about Art, you could see how much it hurt him. Just look at his reaction.
How did you find out that Art passed away?
Oh, God.
Eddie then decided to start doing the frog splash, a move that Art Barr used to do so he could pay tribute to his fallen friend. Eddie did find himself in ECW, and he finally got the opportunity to shine in the United States. And he took that opportunity and he ran with it like he was Usain Bolt at the Olympics. To this day, his matches with Dean Malenko are classics, some of the most beautifully crafted technical masterpieces ever. Eddie was just so good and had so much talent, which caught the attention of this man, Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff brought Eddie Guerrero to be a part of WCW's iconic Cruiserweight division, and for the next few years, live on TNT every Monday night head-to-head with WWF Raw, Eddie and the rest of the Cruiserweights put the world on notice and had fire matches every single week. Eddie would go on to wrestle his friends, people who used to wrestle in Mexico and Japan, such as Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, Jericho, Psychosis, Liger, Ultimo Dragon. Eddie even had matches with Ric Flair. Eddie proved to the world that he was one of the best wrestlers in the entire world. There was so much talent in WCW's midcard, and Eddie was one of the best. Every time you saw Eddie walk into that ring, you knew he was gonna put on a show. Then in 1997, Halloween Havoc, Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio went out there and legit had one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time. Eddie vs. Rey at Halloween Havoc was magical, a match that 23 years later you can still put on and still be surprised at how amazing it was. That should have been the match that propelled both of them to superstardom, but it wasn't. If anything, this is where Eddie's frustration began, because 3 months later, Eddie walked into Eric Bischoff's room and asked for his release, but Bischoff refused and actually yelled at him. Eddie and majority of the other Cruiserweights wanted out, because for the past 2 years, he came to work every single week, gave everything he had, was always getting over, was always having great matches, but was never given that push. And as the year 98 went on, Eddie was just there. He did eventually form the LWO in late 98, and maybe that was gonna be his chance to shine. But at this point in his life, Eddie really became affected by addiction. See, the wrestling business, especially in the 80s and 90s, was infamous for its usage of drugs, whether it be narcotics or prescription. They were everywhere, it was no secret. Eddie, who by then had been in the business for 11 years, garnered his own demons, and on New Year's Eve 1998, Eddie was involved in a car crash, and it was bad. This is what Dave Meltzer reported back in 1999. Eddie suffered a lacerated liver, a fractured pelvis, and a large portion of his calf was ripped off. Guerrero reportedly fell asleep at the wheel and ended up being ejected from his car. The car was totally destroyed, and in this case, the fact that he wasn't wearing a seatbelt is probably what saved his life. And this is what Eddie said in his book about the accident. I woke up again. As the doctors were trying to work on me, I freaked out and started trying to fight them, but they grabbed my arms and held me down. Again, they asked me, "What are you on?" Alcohol, I told them. "No, you're on more than that. What are you on? Tell us what you're on." They kept pushing me. Finally said, "Renutrient." What's that? GHB. GHB is also known as liquid ecstasy. The injuries forced Eddie to take time off wrestling and nurse his injuries. However, this led to even more issues because now he was on painkillers all the time. This just made his addiction worse and worse. He legit couldn't function unless he was on something. I was on painkillers almost all the time. I was taking Vitakin, Oxycontin, anything I could get. I wasn't getting high, I was using them to get through life. Along with pills, I was drinking pretty much all the time, anything to dull the pain. Most people, when they're taking that much painkiller, can barely walk, let alone hit the gym and train, but it was normal to me. I was driven to keep going. He eventually came back and started wrestling again, but the drugs didn't stop. The thing is, Eddie knew what he was doing wasn't right. He knew he had to stop, but he couldn't, and that's what addiction is. In October of '99, he tried to quit cold turkey. For 5 nights he couldn't sleep. He began to beg Vicky to give him some painkillers. She gave him 1, but then he convinced her to give her 2, and when she wasn't looking, he took another cap. And then this happened. The next thing I remember, Vicky was trying to wake me up. I heard her, but it was like I was dreaming. I was in a big hole screaming for help, but I couldn't get out. It was this dark black pit that I couldn't pull myself out of. It was like a grave. I could see the rim, but I couldn't get out. I was howling, help me, help me. Vicky dialed 911 and told them that she needed an ambulance. By the time the EMTs got to the house, I had started having some kind of seizure. I was swallowing my own tongue. They started working on me, but I kept fighting them off. I was begging for help, yet pushing them away at the same time. Eventually he was fine and the doctor told him he needed 2 weeks rest, but Eddie showed up on Nitro 2 days later. Eddie finally got his release from WCW on January 19th, 2000. Eddie was now going to the WWF, a fresh start, a new beginning, and he wasn't going alone. He was going with his best friends. Eddie for the first year in the WWF was amazing. Was he pushed to the main event? No, but he was in storylines, he was in angles, he was over. The crowd loved him and he was getting huge pops. Eddie and China had their angle, Mamacita. Good times. Eddie was able to show his personality, his charm, and the fans fell in love with him. But then, in June of 2001, Eddie showed up to Raw in no condition to work. He was pilled up and Jim Ross talked to him and they both cried. Jim wanted to send Eddie to a 4-month program in Atlanta for rehab. A 4-month program that at first Eddie didn't want to do it because that meant for 4 months he couldn't see his kids. But Eddie knew that he needed help and he needed it bad. So he decided to go to rehab. During his time in rehab, Eddie says he got a lot closer with God and that's what really helped him recover. He completed the entire program, but man, addiction is hard to beat. Once he was out, he was good, but then he started getting these thoughts like, oh, 1 glass of wine won't hurt. It didn't work out. Instead of 1 glass, he got drunk and then he got a DUI. In his book, he explained how he looked up to God and asked, why? I just wanted 1 glass of wine. Why did you let this happen to me? Eddie attributes him getting sober to this moment right here where he understood, I won't be able to do what other people do. I can't have just 1 beer or 1 glass of wine. He felt God was telling him that he can't drink at all anymore. But regardless, he messed up again and Eddie was fired from the WWF. At this point, it was just inevitable that he was gonna go in a downward spiral back into his addiction, but Eddie at this point knew he messed up and knew he had to do better. After everything he had been through, a decade plus in the business, he had to do better, if not for himself, but for his family, his wife and his 2 daughters. So then he worked harder than ever. Name an independent wrestling show from 2002 and he was probably there. He didn't cause any trouble, he didn't drink or pop painkillers, he was just grinding like it was 1987 all over again, just so he could get 1 more shot in the WWE. Eddie was back in the indies and his first match was against a wrestler named Low Ki, later known as Kaval in WWE. The promoter actually asked Eddie, hey, is a draw okay? But Eddie was like, no, it's fine, I'll put him over, just give us a lot of time to wrestle. See, through it all, Eddie was still Eddie, the guy that nobody ever had anything bad to say about. He had been in ECW, WCW, WWF, and nobody ever had an issue with Eddie Guerrero. Eddie just had his own issues. Usually wrestlers come into the indies and feel like they should be worshipped and win every match because they had runs in WWF, but Eddie just wanted to grind and he wanted to wrestle and he just wanted to put in the work, so he didn't mind an up-and-comer getting a W over him. Eddie grinded the indies, even went back to Japan and did a tour there, and most importantly, he stayed sober. And before he knew it, the WWE was calling him again. They realized, hey, he was grinding, he was sober, he was putting the work in, and Eddie was back. He was motivated, he beat his demons, and now Eddie was about to light the WWE on fire. Just 3 weeks into his return, Eddie won the IC title. Eddie believed it was the office's way of telling him, hey, we believe in you. Eddie was back in the WWE doing what he loved in front of thousands of people. He was sober, he was getting reunited with his family again. What a difference a year's dedication can make. Stone Cold Steve Austin actually wanted to work with Eddie Guerrero and they began a feud. Sadly, Austin got burnt out and left the company for a while, but Eddie attributes just the fact that Stone Cold wanted to work with him made Vince believe that Eddie could legit be a main eventer. Eddie also had a great match with The Rock on Raw. Here's The Rock's post on Instagram about it all these years later. Everybody respected Eddie, and after the match, The Rock told Eddie he was proud of him, and that meant a lot to Eddie. As the months went on, Eddie found himself on SmackDown and became a part of the legendary SmackDown 6 with Chavo, Ray, Chris Benoit, Kurt Angle, and Edge. And in November of 2002, Eddie and his nephew Chavo went on to win the tag team titles at MSG. The two kids who grew up together in El Paso, Texas, were now at MSG, wrestling in front of 20,000 people, winning the titles. Eddie was living his best life, and Eddie really took off with the Los Guerreros. The whole lying, cheating, and stealing thing was so entertaining, and the fans loved it. They were supposed to be heels, but how could you hate them? They would come out getting insane pops, have great matches, and entertain the fans. Eddie was being Eddie, and it was organic. The people loved it. You could argue it was a negative stereotype, but here's what Eddie thought about it. Obviously, Latino heat is a bit of a cartoon, but that doesn't make it a negative stereotype. Far from it. I don't think I would have been blessed with the love and support of the Chicano community if they truly felt Latino heat was a bad representation of my people. Eddie in 2003 was on a roll. Everybody loved him in the ring. Everybody loved him backstage. He got closer with his family again, and he was working with his nephew Chavo. Eddie became a leader backstage, and as 2003 progressed, Eddie went on to a singles role, and he ended up becoming the United States champion. Eddie in little over a year was IC champ, tag team champ, and now US champ, and the best part was he was also sober. In January of 2004, Chris Benoit won the Royal Rumble, and he decided he was going to go from SmackDown all the way to Raw to challenge the Raw champion at Mania. This meaning that SmackDown needed its own #1 contender for Brock Lesnar's title, so they had their own mini Royal Rumble on SmackDown. In a match where Kurt Angle and Big Show were probably gonna win to go on to verse Brock Lesnar as they had done many times in 2003, the WWE was probably gonna go with the safe bet, right? But then Eddie Guerrero became the #1 contender for the WWE Championship. Eddie eliminated Angle to become the #1 contender, and the fans were going crazy. Eddie was going crazy. Commentary was going crazy. Eddie was going to No Way Out against Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship. See, nobody thought this was gonna happen. Eddie certainly didn't, but it did. The Office trusted him. They felt he was ready and it was his time. What a story. After everything he had been through, he was going to main event a pay-per-view for the WWE Championship against Brock Lesnar. See, at this time, nobody knew Brock Lesnar was leaving. They did know he was going to versus Goldberg at WrestleMania, but really, nobody believed that Eddie Guerrero would actually win. Come on, he was what, 5'6", 5'7"? They were really gonna let Eddie Guerrero beat Brock Lesnar? Next week on SmackDown, Eddie came out happy as ever. In his lowrider, he began talking, but out came Brock Lesnar. And here we were, Brock and Eddie face to face. See, Brock gets the mic and says, "Congratulations, Eddie, you did it." And then Lesnar starts listing off all the wrestlers he beat. "I've beat Hogan, Flair, Rock, Angle, I'm not scared of anyone." He then mentions, "I'm not afraid of Goldberg either," and he's not afraid of Eddie. See, Lesnar and Goldberg had this ongoing beef, and Stone Cold Steve Austin gave Goldberg a ticket front row to No Way Out, where Lesnar was going to wrestle Eddie. Eddie gets the mic and is like, "Damn, Brock, those are some amazing accomplishments. I don't have those. All I have going for me is that every obstacle that has been put in front of me, I have overcome. But I didn't overcome these obstacles by listening to people like you." Eddie explained of all the things he's heard over the years. "Eddie, you're not 6'7", 300 pounds. You won't make it in the business. Oh, Eddie, you'll never beat these demons. Eddie, you'll never redeem your kids." Eddie was just snapping and the crowd's chanting, "Eddie, Eddie." He picks up the mic again. He goes face to face with Brock, showing no fear, and tells Brock, "You're just an obstacle." Brock goes to him and says, "Eddie, all those demons and all those people were right." And Eddie just wilds out. He attacks Brock, punches, kicks, Lesnar rolls out and retreats, and Eddie just standing there in the ring with the title as the fans chant his name. Maybe this could happen. Maybe Eddie Guerrero could beat Brock Lesnar, but there was still some doubt. But regardless, Eddie was ready and he was going to give it his all. Next week on SmackDown, we got the iconic Brock Lesnar and the Mariachi Band promo. Brock comes out dancing in the sombrero, dancing and laughing, jumping around. One of the funniest moments ever. Brock is in the ring. "Eddie, I'm throwing you a celebration, because come Sunday, you'll have nothing to celebrate." He's still dancing, just having the time of his life. The band is playing and he's just smiling like a little kid. But then out comes Eddie Guerrero running. And ladies and gentlemen, we got one of the best promos of all time. Eddie and Brock go face to face just 4 days before their pay-per-view. And Brock just simply says, "Eddie, you're a fighter. That's why they love you." But then he goes up to him and says, "Listen here, addict. This Sunday, you're not fighting the odds. You're fighting Brock Lesnar. Eddie, when you were fighting demons, I was winning NCAA championships. When you were a recovering addict, I was becoming the youngest WWE champion in history. Eddie, I really hope you're addicted to losing, cause this Sunday you're gonna get your fix. And Eddie then proceeds to cut his greatest promo, his greatest lines. You wanna talk about addiction, essay? Truth is, Brock, I am an addict. See, Brock, 3 years ago in Minneapolis, in your hometown, in the shower, I was high. And I don't remember much, but I do remember they carried me out of the arena and straight into rehab. And you know what night he's referring to? The one we talked about. The night of him and Jim Ross having that conversation. But day by day, by the grace of God, I've earned my way back into this ring. Day by day, I've earned the respect of my kids again. He explains that winning the title and putting it on his waist is how he's going to prove to his family that he's sorry. He points to the belt and says, that's my new addiction. When I step into this ring, yeah bro, I am addicted. I'm addicted to the high I get from them. I'm addicted to the do or die feeling I'ma have this Sunday at No Way Out. And then he drops this amazing line, a line that I'll never forget. This was just amazing. But the difference between you and me, Brock, is that I am an addict and I'll do anything and run over anybody it's going to take to get that around my waist and get my high at No Way Out and become the new WWE Champion. He drops the mic and just walks out. This was more than a wrestling promo. This was real life. This is straight from the heart. This is stuff you can't fake. This is real emotion. This wasn't Latino Heat talking. This was Eddie Guerrero talking. This was for the people who doubted him, the people who thought that he would never recover, who thought he was just wasted talent. But now he was one step closer to achieving the ultimate dream. Now he was sober, now he was clean, now he had his family back. 3 years ago, this man was in rehab. 3 years ago, this man got fired from the company. But now, 3 years later, he's main eventing a WWE pay-per-view with the chance to become WWE Champion. Spike Lee couldn't paint a better picture. And here we were, the Bay Area, the Cow Palace, No Way Out 2004, Eddie Guerrero versus Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship. After years of addiction, failures, ups and downs, everything he had been through, he was here at his pay-per-view. His face on the poster, his name in the main event, and it was his biggest match of his 17-year career. The crowd had so many Latinos in there. Eddie had a home field advantage away from home. His family was there, his brothers, his mom, Chavo and Chavo Classic in the back. This was going to be something special. Brock came out and he had been jackhammered by Goldberg earlier, so he was angrier than ever. He was going to destroy Eddie. But Eddie came out showing no fear in his lowrider and the fans erupted. They went crazy for him. This is what they were waiting for all night. And Michael Cole said this brilliant line on commentary. This is Eddie's chance to show that there is a way out. The crowd was going crazy. It had that big match feel, and these two had an amazing match. It was such an awesome match because Lesnar and smaller wrestlers work so well, and it's hard to find a better smaller wrestler than Eddie freaking Guerrero. You had this insane crowd, you had Brock and you had Eddie Guerrero. Of course it was going to be fire. For 20 minutes, Lesnar destroyed him, but Eddie kept trying to fight back, and the crowd was behind him 100%, chanting, Eddie, Eddie. It was violent, it was brutal, it was an assault. Lesnar was like a beast uncaged, but Eddie kept fighting back. Attacks against the post, vicious suplexes, submissions, it didn't matter. Eddie was a fighter. Eddie eventually got momentum and did a head scissors. Then he does some suplexes. He goes to the top rope and it's time for the frog splash, but Brock moves away. Lesnar gets him up, a kick to the gut, and he goes for the F5, but he F5s Guerrero into the referee, knocking down Brian Hebner. Lesnar rolls to the floor and he grabs the WWE title. He rolls back in and the ref is still down, and this man was going to cheat to win, wasn't he? The irony. This man was going to cheat against Eddie Guerrero. He goes back into the ring, he turns around and bang, spear, spear. Goldberg spears Lesnar and the crowd goes absolutely insane. Goldberg just taunts, leaves, and everybody is down and we're back to square one. Lesnar, referee, and Eddie, everyone's down, and the fans just get louder and louder chanting Eddie's name. Eddie, Eddie. Guerrero crawls on top of Lesnar slowly. The referee wakes up. 1, 2, 3. No, Lesnar kicked out. If Eddie was going to win, it was going to take more than somebody else's finisher. He had to deliver the final blow. So now Eddie grabs the belt and it's his time to cheat to win, but Lesnar crawls up to his feet. He turns around and Eddie goes for the belt shot, but is ducked by Lesnar, who gets another knee, and Lesnar picks him up for the F5. Well, it's over, isn't it? F5, but Guerrero and Mayday reverses it into a DDT on top of the belt. The crowd is going apeshit at this point. Eddie slowly goes to the top rope. He's standing there and Eddie Guerrero hits him with a frog splash. The same move he began doing in 1994 because of his fallen tag team partner. He goes for the cover. 1, 2, 3. Eddie won the championship. What a match, what a moment. Eddie is jumping for joy, he's going crazy. Everyone in the crowd was jumping. He goes ringside, he hugs his mom, and it was just so emotional. He's celebrating with the fans and the fans just love him. They swarm him and he's hugging them. I got chills, man. He's standing on the announce table just celebrating, just soaking it in, and it was just beautiful. I don't know how else to describe it, but beautiful. Tears in his eyes, tears in the fans' eyes, tears in my eyes, tears in everyone's eyes. This was a moment that whether you were an Eddie fan or not, you couldn't help but smile. This is a moment that will live on forever, a moment that made Vince McMahon cry backstage. And that brings me back to this picture. So, is this just another wrestling picture? No, it's much more than that. This picture represents growth, dedication, chasing your dreams, beating your demons, overcoming all the obstacles you may face, and most importantly, believing in yourself and never giving up. He started wrestling 17 years ago. 10 years ago, he had lost his tag team partner. 5 years ago, he almost lost his life in a car crash. 4 years ago, he almost died in his home while trying to beat his addictions. 3 years ago, he was sent to rehab. Also, 3 years ago, he was fired from the WWE. He lost his job. He lost his family. And 2 years ago, he was wrestling in bingo halls. But then he came back, and he came back in life. He was down for the count, and 90% of people would have stayed down for the count, but he didn't. He got up, and he beat his addictions. He worked harder than everyone. He got his job back. He got his family back. He got his life back. And now he was the WWE Champion. I told you, it was more than just a picture of a wrestler winning a title. It was a magical moment that I will never forget. It is a moment that means more to me than just wrestling, but gives me inspiration in life. The journey of Eddie Guerrero is not just a wrestling story. His story is something that can inspire anyone. And for that, I thank you, Eddie. It was a magical moment that I will never forget. Rest in peace, Eddie Guerrero.